Years ago, I started to look into MBTI and the Jungian cognitive function. I found the concepts to be extremely true and useful. I wanted to understand human nature better. Things like individual differences, like why some people thrive in chaos while others need structure. The problem was that the cognitive functions are great, but I couldn't really fully understand the process that people mentally went through that created these differences. What was one person seeing that was clearly missing from the other person's perspective? I figured I could get a better understanding if I related it to neuroscience. I wondered if any work had been done in this field. To my luck, a researcher had done just that and released a book on the matter that same year. His name is Dario Nardi, and the book is Neuroscience of Personality. This book was amazing, and it gave me so many insights into the cognitive process people go through when making decisions. One thing that struck me was that the thinking function was incredibly well represented in the orbital prefrontal cortex and the surrounding areas.
Are one or more of these regions on the interior active? That indicates an interest in what's called introverted thinking. Conversely, with ESTP, I won't go into detail about this one, but you can see that sort of the other executive is the one that's more in charge. And this side over here, this side here, is much more about managing process, about allowing new information in and sort of dwelling on that information and allowing it to affect what it is that you do. These regions here are for logical reasoning. So if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Yes, absolutely. So this region will hopefully, now that's a little bit, folks already know that, so they don't need to think too much about it. But if you really want to go through that logical branching, this is the region that is going to be really fantastic for that. Over here, a great example would be a porpoise. Is that a mammal or a fish? It's a mammal, yes. In fact, you would even think it's strange to sort of mix those categories that are there. This region is about weighing. Something comes in, and it has a spatial relationship, actually. There's thousands, potentially, of categories and subcategories. Where does something fit when it comes in? What is the category that it fits well in?
In my last video, where I explained how and why Jung came up with the cognitive function, I had mentioned that Sheldon is an introverted thinker. As Dario explained to us, people who prefer introverted thinking use F3, the deductive analyst. In other words, if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. In this next scene, you will see Sheldon has noticed that in the case of this driver's ed question, none of the answers fits as C. And he will explain a correct answer for C.
When are roadways most slippery? Now, okay, there are three answers, none of which are correct. The correct answer is when covered by a film of liquid sufficient to reduce the coefficient of static friction between the tire and the road to essentially zero, but not so deep as to introduce a new source of friction.
Another region TI loves to use is F4, the expert classifier. Sheldon explains that a car length does not fall into the category of standard unit of measure, and therefore may not be used systematically for this purpose.
Just look. See, this first question makes no sense. Like, how many car lengths should you leave in front of you when driving? There's no possible way to answer that. A car length is not a standardized unit of measure.
Introverted thinking likes to use FP2, which notices which step you are on in a task, keeps track over time to ensure the correct order is used, while extroverted thinking prefers FP1, which provides reason, decides between two options, and detects an error. Let's see how the use of these brain regions plays out in this next scene.
Okay, now what you want to do first is turn on the ignition and shift into drive.
I haven't fastened my seatbelt yet.
Okay, fasten your seatbelt.
Click. Now, are there airbags?
You don't need airbags.
What does a simulated van rear ends mean?
I'll hit you in the face with a pillow.
As you could see, Sheldon was hyper-focused on task order and safety precautions. The extroverted thinkers quickly noticed the error in this thinking, figured out that between the two options of having safety devices or not, which is better and why. Now let's get back to Dario's book as he explains the lower, more primitive regions of the brain. Limbic system. This middle layer of the brain includes structures such as the amygdala, hippocampus, and thalamus. You may have heard of these. They regulate numerous functions that are mostly primal and unconscious, including attachment and pair bonding, such as an infant to its mother, body language, including sexual signaling, deeply seated prejudice, and superstitious feelings such as fear of the dark and aversion to toxic-looking substances. Encoding of information from short-term memory to long-term memory. Instinctual reactions such as the fight or flight response. Raw emotional responses such as anger, disgust, and fear. Sexuality, including sexual orientation and many gender-specific behaviors. And sexual attraction such as to youthful, symmetrical faces. Wakefulness, sleep, dreaming, and other states of consciousness. Sometimes the limbic system's humdrum activities trickle up to the neocortex, such as memory retrieval, appearing as brief blips on the EEG monitor in the central regions C3 and C4, but often this does not occur. To me, some of these functions are critical to the cognitive function. Obviously, the Jungian feeling function is all about exploring primal emotions such as fear, anger, and disgust. FI specifically is all about interest, body language, sexual signaling, pair bonding, and in groups versus out groups. Extroverted sensing includes things such as dominance through body language, instinctual fight or flight response, and gender norms. Or even intuition, i.e. encoding information into long-term memory to use at a later time. Overall, the book is incredible and gave me huge insights on a lot of things. It just wasn't enough for me. I needed to get a deeper look at the brain. I wanted to answer a question. Are the cognitive functions actually found in these deeper structures? Today, I can tell you that yes, absolutely, Jung's functions are found in these deeper structures. I will be more specific. The feeling function is done in large part by the amygdala, insula, and the anterior cingulate cortex. The sensing function is done in large part by the basal ganglia, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Also the insula, which is interesting enough. The intuition function is done with the hippocampus and posterior cingulate cortex. But what about thinking? As I said earlier, the orbital prefrontal cortex and its surrounding areas seems to be doing it, but isn't that the neocortex? Wouldn't this destroy my theory that the older limbic regions do the cognitive functions?
Okay, so shifting from the amygdala, going to the incredibly interesting, important frontal cortex. And frontal cortex obviously was doing all sorts of stuff 2 lectures ago in the sex lecture, getting you to have the appropriate context for sexual behavior, getting to do the harder thing like leaping over streams and headbutting with other antlered beasts, if that's part of your mating season. Where the frontal cortex is particularly involved is this whole world of regulating appropriate behavior in the context of violence, aggression, competition, cooperation. Frontal cortex is incredibly important here. Okay, back to the limbic lecture. The limbic system is about subcortical structures underneath, things like that, and the cortex is about the cortex, and we heard in the limbic lecture, instead what was originally that heretical view by that neuroanatomist Nauta saying, actually the frontal cortex is part of the limbic system. It should be viewed as such, and over the years since, it being viewed as this is the cortical part of the limbic system. This is the cortical region that is intensely involved with limbic function, with emotional function. On an anatomical level, what we've already seen is, just as a first pass, tons of bidirectional connections, everything in the limbic system talking to the frontal cortex sending projections back all over the limbic system, so anatomically it's there. So in terms of what it's doing, the best way to describe what the frontal cortex is about is when there's a choice between doing something harder and something easier, and the harder thing is the better thing to do, it's the thing that makes you do the harder thing.
To be honest, in retrospect, Sheldon isn't the best example because he has been written in as extremely narcissistic and childish. That being said, it would be criminal not to have Amy Farrah Fowler in a show about neuroscience that is featuring the Big Bang Theory. Epic side note, Mayim Bialik, who plays Amy's character, started her career as a child actress in the TV show Blossom. She then received a doctorate degree in neuroscience before starting her new role playing a neuroscientist on the Big Bang Theory. Now that we know that the orbital prefrontal cortex is a part of the limbic system, let's watch and see if Sheldon can do the hard right over the easy wrong.
Well, I'm going to be doing some brainstem histology while you put yourself on the business end of a sponge and wash those beakers.
Wash those. Oh, I get it. Little hazing for the new fella. Yeah, better keep an eye out for what? Shoe polish on the microscope? For mad cow disease in my grilled cheese sandwich?
No, I just need those beakers washed. Hippity hop, quick like a bunny.
What? Excuse me? You have Dr. Sheldon Cooper in your lab. You're going to make him do the dishes? That's like asking the Incredible Hulk to open a pickle jar. Here you go. This is now the only lab with glassware washed by a man with 2 doctorates and a restraining order signed by Carl Sagan.
Soap spots, wash them again.
You're being ridiculous. Those are perfectly clean.
Sheldon, this beaker used to contain cerebrospinal fluid from an elephant that died of syphilis. If it's in fact perfectly clean, drink from it.
Biologists are mean.
Sheldon, I've given you the simplest things to do, and you haven't done one of them right.
Maybe that's because I'm not being challenged. It's the same reason Einstein failed math. You think you're doing science by cutting up that brain? They could do the same thing at any Quiznos. And they'd offer to toast it for me, too.
Okay, smart guy. I'm about to remove the locus coeruleus, which is incredibly delicate work. Have at it.
All right. I'm no stranger to a little gray matter. Locus coeruleus.
You're getting warmer. It is indeed in the brain. Hope your hands are steady. It's the width of a single hair. But this is just biology, so I'm sure it's no problem for a genius like you.
It's not. I'll have you know that in the field of physics, we work with particles so small, they make fat jokes about the locus coeruleus. Does the locus coeruleus normally bleed that much?
No, but your thumb does.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, you're a biologist. Do you honestly think you can just waltz back in here after the way you behaved yesterday?
I was not myself. I had lost a lot of thumb blood.
That's not an apology.
That is your opinion.
I want a real apology.
I'm sorry that you weren't able to... That my genius...
No.
That the soap was...
Sheldon.
Fine. Sorry.
You're forgiven. Now, if you want to stay, get started on those beakers. They're still dirty from yesterday.
Next year I'm going to Epcot.
In conclusion, his introverted thinking is a function that is performed by the orbital prefrontal cortex. Although the emotions that are done by the amygdala and its friends do still have a place in the psyche. Overall, in the end, he does do the harder right. I will be explaining each function better in upcoming videos. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you can be here for all upcoming content. Definitely check out my video where I explain the fourth dimension. And until next time, take care.